we get started, I just wanted to highlight just the wonderful people that were part of the advisory committee for this redistricting competition. So our Fair Maps competition advisory panel included Jeff Cabot. And now Jeff was actually served as the treasurer of Fair Districts Fair Elections in 2018. He also was the executive director of Kids Voting for many, many years. And then we have Professor Emeritus Brian Glassman of Cleveland State Marshall College of Law, Sam Gresham from Common Cause, of course, and then Brad Henry, who was with EduTechnologic. Sorry about that, Brad. And then he also does some really amazing work on voting rights as well. We have Bill Hershey from the Dayton Daily News. He is now an emeritus as well. Then Joan Lawrence, and many of you will remember that Joan Lawrence was a wonderful advocate for redistricting reform year after year. She was active with the league. When she was in the state legislature, she is somebody who introduced, redistricting reform, every General Assembly. And she went on to become the head of the Department of Aging under Taft. Then we have David Niven. Many of you will remember David Niven testifying down in Cincinnati and also at the State House. He is at the University of Cincinnati. And then we have Sherry Obrunsky she's at the Cleveland Teachers Union. Stephanie Casey Pierce, who is doing a postdoc at the John Glenn School at OSU. And then we have Katie Shanahan at All on the Line. And then Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan with the Ohio Council of Churches, Deepak Puri, who's with Parsec Solutions, and Andre Washington of the A. Philip Randolph Institute. And so we've hit the point where we give a couple minutes for people to gather. I'm going to encourage all of you to put your location, your name and your location into the chat, and we'll just get kicked off. So please, we'd love to know where you're from. And if you want to, you can even add what congressional district you are living in. All right, and with that, I am Catherine Terser with Common Cause Ohio. While we were waiting, I was listing off the people that were part of this advisory committee. The redistricting competition, or the mapping competition, was really the brainchild of Joan Lawrence, who serves on that advisory committee. And one of the things that I think is really exciting is that we've had a series of these, first to promote reform, and now to promote really good maps coming out of the Ohio Redistricting Commission or possibly the state legislature. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Chris Cusack. He is a professor emeritus at Keene State College in Keene, New Hampshire. He got his PhD at the University of Akron. And with that, Chris, do you want to take it away?
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Hi, yes. So I've been working with Fair Districts Ohio on these mapping competitions, and it's really been exciting, and a lot of wonderful maps have been put forward, submitted. And so what I've done is sort of gone through, make sure they've all been legal, and then also scored them in a variety of settings to get some quantitative analysis before presenting, in this case, in this competition, the top 7 maps to the advisory committee, so that they could have a rich discussion and look, and it wasn't just a numeric score that, we don't really get a sense of the humanity of Ohio, that the advisory commission could really talk about that and look at communities of interest and do all those sorts of things. So that's where we stand. And so I just thought I'd run through a few slides rather briefly, and then what we'll do is we'll hear from our 3 winners in some discussion about their maps and what their thought processes were and their priorities. So, so just a brief overview of the congressional districts mapping. All the maps, no matter what the software platform that was used to create the maps, they were all imported into Dave's redistricting, which has a really quite nice sort of analysis capabilities. And so they're analyzed in Dave's on these five criterion: proportionality, as you can see, competitiveness, minority rights, compactness, and splitting. And so what we want is bigger is better, essentially, and they're normalized, rated from 0 to 100. And so this is what we'll see. And we'll just see a static map, a static image of each of the maps that are the winners in the next few slides based on these scores. So if we can look at the next. So here's first place, and this was the overall #1 point score of all the map submissions. But again, we didn't rely just on points. It was also based on, where the boundaries were drawn, how the communities of interest were kept together or split, how many county splits there were. There's a whole host of things that were looked at. So this was John Hagner's map, and what she'll be talking about and detailing more in person, but we see a very high score in proportionality, which is representational fairness. So anyway, a lot of area in the green in the diagram as each of those values is scored from 0 to 100. But John will be talking about his map. So I'll just move on. We'll move to the second map here, second place, which was Paul, and close behind, right, in terms of point totals with 346. And that's why the advisory commission was really the discussion. It took about an hour and a half of analysis and discussion and back and forth, and a lot of very, very valuable points being made by members of the committee. Because again, a few points here or there. That's why we had to think about the subjective nature of Ohio and how the population is dispersed and who lives where and where the splits come into play. So slightly different looking map here with Paul, but also very, very strong scores overall. And then our third place map was Riley. And so Riley Jones, we see 325 points, but scoring quite high in proportionality and competitiveness. And these were two things that the advisory committee really appreciated, right? So high scores in proportionality, whereas Dave's just gives you 5 scores and you can total them up. The advisory committee thought, well, proportionality and competitiveness might be a little bit more important than some of the other variables. And so also we'll see Riley scored quite high in another metric that we'll look at in just a second. So those are the 3 maps. And again, each of these winners will be sort of analyzing and talking about their maps. And we can see that each of the 3 maps is more than 150% better than your existing map, when you can sort of see the sort of craziness of the boundaries in some of the districts there, and the very, very low total point and also individual scores, single digits for competitiveness and splitting, and proportionality, which is representational fairness, is quite low. So all 3 maps did a far, I mean, no comparison, better job than what you're dealing with in Ohio right now. Beyond these, just to point out, and we can come back to slides too, but really it's not about this, it's really about our 3 winners. So I want to move to our next slide and just see some of the other things. And one of those things is, how do districts get gerrymandered? What is gerrymandering? It's really sort of packing and cracking are the 2 terms that are associated with it, where if you pack people in so that they win by overwhelming margins, you have a lot of wasted votes, right? Or if you crack districts up and populations up so that there's no chance their candidate will win, that's also wasted votes. And so the efficiency gap, we can see, again, Riley scoring high here, but all of them very, very low in terms of inefficiencies. They're all, and why do they all favor Republicans? That's in part because of the dispersal of the Ohio the voting population in Ohio. You certainly probably could make an egregious map that favors Democrats, but just in terms of proportionality and efficiency gap, we can see they're far lower and far more equitable scores than the existing map that you have, which is a quite higher percentage. And so what we're saying, when you see 4.0% favoring Republicans, that means Republicans' votes are 4% less inefficient, so that the Democrats' votes are more inefficient, which means you have more wasted votes due to packing and cracking. And so this was just another metric that we wanted to take a look at beyond what Dave's gives us for their analysis. And then just a few other ways why we liked these 3 maps is really quite low numbers of splits. We see Paul has the fewest splits, and sort of when we're thinking about that, that's something I think the people of Ohio want. And you can see compared to what you've been dealing with, 23 county splits, a total of 32 times. So, half or less than half the number of splits of our 3 winners in comparison to your existing map. And then just in terms of competitiveness, Dave's redistricting looks at Republican leans, Democrat leans, and then competitive districts, which Dave's measures as between 45 to 55% in the voting, partisan voting range. But oftentimes we understand that if someone has a 54.6%, Republican and a 47.4%, that's in that range, but it's not truly competitive. So we just sort of looked at it a little bit closer, and the next slide shows that if we're going to say, let's really get competitive, what we came up with a term as hyper competitive, where the difference between Republican and Democratic shares, the total vote is less than 3%. And this is where we can really sort of tease out. Now, for representational fairness, based on there's more Republican voters than Democrat voters, there should be 8, if you just want straight Republican, straight representational fairness, there should be 8 Republican districts and 7 Democratic districts. And here we can see that all 3 of these maps, you're probably going to end up something like that compared to your existing map where it's 12-4. And so really there's 4 Democrat districts and there's 12 Republicans, and there's not really any chance of any of those really flipping. Whereas here we can see that there might be some opportunities to have real competitiveness. And so this was all the information. Catherine really did a nice job going through, and just wanted to get a tip of the cap to the advisory committee members who took all this information, but much more than that, right? Looked at individual communities, thought about communities, whether it's an Appalachian community or people of color or farmers or whatever it might be, and how were they kept together, and what did they value of all of these metrics more perhaps than some of the other metrics, and a lot of rich discussion. And that's where of the 7 finalists in terms of point totals that came down to these 3 winners. And so that's just a brief overview. And I think now at this point, we can go to our winners and have them start to just give a little explanation of their mapping, sort of tease out their priorities and their thought processes. And also Catherine can ask some questions from the public and sort of model what should be done in the actual state of Ohio.
Well, and I am encourage you all to put questions into the chat. So throw your questions in there. Now, keep in mind the map makers are here, and we want this process to be constructive as possible. So, if you have specific questions, especially about the area that you live in, just put that in. If you can put the name of the town and the county, so that we can kind of quickly get to that space, that would be really helpful. And with that, Chris, do you want to introduce John Hagner?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do so. John Hagner is our first place winner of this mapping competition. He's an Ohio native, and actually, I think he can do quite well. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to know what he wants to introduce himself, but I'll turn it over to you, John.
Great, thank you for having me. This is a fun competition. I was glad to enter. Yeah, it's nice to work in a nonpartisan setting. My day job is quite partisan, so it was nice to step back and think about what fairness would look like in this context. And I think, as Chris alluded to, all of the maps that we drew do have a Republican lean. These are not Democratic maps. My goal in doing this was to come up with something that was fair and that followed the law. I think when we think about why a map that is quote unquote looks fair often has a Republican lean, it's easy for us to talk about vote sorting or make it seem like this is a natural event. Part of why there's so many disparities and there's so much partisan imbalance here is the centuries of segregation and redlining. And I think we can't talk about why the African-American community in the east side of Cleveland is as concentrated as is without recognizing that those were intentional choices made over centuries, and that it's not natural, but it is the world that we live in now, and map makers need to confront that. So the way that I started drawing this map was, again, checking in with the law on where Ohio is, the reforms that the voters here passed and figuring out what was possible and how we could respect both the spirit and the letter of that law, which calls for a reduction in splits, which calls for partisan balance, and make a map that looked sane and looked normal and respected the communities in Ohio. So where I started was in CD 11 in Cuyahoga County. It was really important to me that district reflect the Voting Rights Act Black majority district that CD 11 has been for a long time, but stay completely in Cuyahoga County. The current district goes down to Akron. It's possible to draw a district that is with a strong African-American population, with a plurality in the voting age population that stays entirely within CD 11 or within Cuyahoga County, and that has the whole city of Cleveland, which the new law allows or requires. So started there, also put districts in Franklin County and in Hamilton County entirely. Both of those districts, I tried to keep African-American communities together as much as possible. The line in Franklin County is drawn to maximize the Black population of the 3rd district. So if you sort of zoom in, this long straight line is Indianola Avenue, which is a racial dividing line in Columbus. So the 15th has the campus of Ohio State, has the short north, has a lot of downtown, because when you add up the parts of Franklin County with the largest Black population, that's what remains. I think the line drawn through Franklin County, I'd be very curious for Franklin County folks' opinions on how that could be improved or changed. Where it started, the decisions that I made were, again, based purely on trying to maximize the African-American population. I'll show on the map here, where you can see a little bit of what that looks like, right? That the darker the color, the higher the African-American population, and you can see how that dictated a lot of the line drawing. Continuing through, there's a district here entirely within Hamilton County that has the whole city of Cincinnati, which has been cracked and split for decades. Hamilton County deserves a single county district. I think the new law, definitely encourages that. So once those were done, the next place where I turned was to Appalachia. I think there's the Appalachian region of Ohio is a really distinct and unique cultural area that's about the same population as a congressional district. So it was really important to me to keep that together. So this district, which is numbered 6, there have been versions of this for a couple decades now. It's less well identified now than it has been as an Appalachian district, but making sure that we kept as much of that community together as possible. The other things that I wanted to make sure that we did was to maximize some competitive seats. I think one place where I think the Dave's redistricting is a great tool, we're really lucky to have it, but it can flatten a lot of the conversation around how you define performance and partisanship and competitiveness. They throw everything into a blender and make an average, but Ohio is a diverse and interesting state. As I was looking at, how we could draw in this map, there are 9 districts that some Democratic candidate in the last couple years has carried, right? Most of the case it's Sherrod Brown, who, won about an 8-point lead statewide. So that means he carried a lot of districts that other Democrats have lost. When you start to look into the patterns of support, there are parts of the state that were strongly for Trump and strongly for Brown. There are parts of the state where Rich Cordray did better than Hillary Clinton. There are parts of the state where Rich Cordray did worse. I think it's easy to just look at the most recent election and say, oh, well, we know what's going to happen forever. But voters are a little more complicated than that. And there are still a lot of ticket splitters here. So on the top line number, I think that this map would usually elect 7 Democrats and 8 Republicans, but not always. And there are districts here that a strong candidate from one party or another, I think, could break through. A candidate more like Sherrod Brown or more like Donald Trump, might be able to win or lose relatively. I think when we talk about partisanship, we have to be really clear on what that means and how we're defining it. It's easy for people who are, thinking about the whole country to just use Trump and Biden numbers and call it a day. But I think that loses a lot of the important context. So yeah, that was a quick drive through on some of the choices here. Yeah, what I'm proudest of on this map is that it keeps communities together that makes sense. My biggest regret on this map is District 8, where this sort of hook around the Miami Valley is not ideal. There's not really a perfect way to fix that. I think 8 and 2, stretching from the suburbs of Cincinnati to the suburbs of Columbus, neither of those are ideal. But when you prioritize keeping the Miami Valley together, Hamilton together, and Appalachia, that's kind of what is left over, which is unfortunate. I wish that there was a more elegant solution. But yeah, I think overall I'm proud and excited to get the chance to show it off. And I'll turn it back over, I think, to Chris.
I'm not sure if Catherine, do you have, are we going to follow up some questions?
I do have some questions. We've gotten some questions in the chat, and we have some questions that we received in advance. So John, one of the questions that we got had to do with your choices surrounding Stark County. There was kind of an interest in looking at Northeast Ohio and Stark Summit and Portage, and how you made those choices.
Yeah. So as I said, I started with CD11, and then that left the rest of Cuyahoga County, which pairs up naturally with Lorain, and the sort of west side suburban district, I think, makes a lot of sense. It was important to me to keep Summit County whole. And one of the options I know that Riley's map did is to keep Akron and Canton together, which I think makes a lot of sense. But then everything else gets kind of awkward. With the 14th needs to be the whole corner. So Akron and Portage County are culturally really connected. There's a lot of back and forth between Kent and Akron, that keeping them together made sense. And then Geauga County, as it becomes more suburban, as it becomes more populated, it used to be really rural. It's gotten a lot more suburban in the last couple decades. It's becoming more like Summit County. So I thought that those together made sense. Canton and Stark County is more industrial. It borders on Appalachia. I thought it paired up well with Columbiana County and Wayne County. I also think that, under this map, the 11th is strongly Democratic. The 5th and the 13th are competitive districts that Biden carried really narrowly. The 14th is a Trump-shared district. So I think this gives us a couple different ways of having competitive elections in an important corner of the state.
Well, thank you. So this is, we had a number of questions surrounding Gahanna. Can you tell me how you divided up Franklin County and kind of what happened with Gahanna and why it was necessary to do that? Yeah,
so I don't know that I would say necessary. The choice that I made on Gahanna was purely driven by maximizing the African-American percentage of the 3rd district. Gahanna has a large and important Somali community that's geographically concentrated in the southern part of the city. So, as you can see here, I'm trying to click in. There are parts of Gahanna that are very African-American, and there are parts that are very white. So where the line is drawn, it's the same with a little corner of Westerville, was drawn to maximize the Black population in the 3rd. That's definitely something that I think the communities there should have a larger voice in saying exactly where those lines should fall. And I'm definitely open to amending where that is.
John,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Could you zoom in just a little bit closer and then tick the city lines so they could see how Gahanna is split there?
Yeah. So
thank you.
This is Gahanna. The line sort of comes down the middle. And there are more African-American voters here than in the part that's in the 3rd. So yeah, Gahanna absolutely could be moved all one side or the other. Obviously, once you make that choice, it has impacts down the line. So if you put all of Gahanna into the 3rd, you would need to move more somewhere else into the 15th or vice versa. But that was what was driving it, is the African American community, particularly the Somali American community.
So I have a question that was early in the chat from Debbie. She was wondering about incumbents and whether in your map 2 incumbents were together, realizing that we have 2 congressional races in the 11th and the 15th. So we don't have 2 incumbents. Do you know? And if you don't, we can answer that at another time. That was an interesting question.
So it's a really interesting question. I didn't intend to think about incumbents when I did this, but as it happens, this map would put both Jim Jordan and Warren Davidson's house into the 8th. They live very close to each other. And it would put both Bob Latta and Marcy Kaptur together in the 9th. You know, there's technically no incumbent in the 4th. So I assume somebody in a world where this got passed would move there and run. If Anthony Gonzalez was running for re-election, he lives in the 5th. Right now, there's also no incumbent in the 13th. If Tim Ryan were running for re-election, he lives in the 14th. So, but Bob Gibbs lives in the 7th. Chantel Brown, soon to be a congresswoman, I expect, lives in the 11th. Both Mike Carey and Allison Rousseau live in the 15th. Brad Wenstrup lives in the 2nd. Johnson is in the 6th. And then the guy whose name I always forget is in the 12th, who still lives there.
So,
And Mike Turner here in Dayton.
we also had an interesting question related to the 65 counties that need to be kept whole. Did you worry about just keeping counties whole generally, or did you think, oh, I can go above and beyond in splits because I only have to keep 65 whole?
I did the very minimum to get to basically 0 population deviation. One of the things that I'm proud of on this map, Ohio precincts are a gerrymandered mess of their own. So I broke down a lot of precincts into blocks. So the largest population deviation here, I think there's one district that, is 3 too few voters. So I try to get really, really close to 0, which requires doing some splits. So I did the minimum that we're allowed to make that happen. The law would have allowed me to split more. And I think the one argument for doing that would be to bring a 3rd district into Cuyahoga County to make the 13th more democratic and more likely that a Democratic candidate would care. I think you could make a representational fairness argument to do that, but I wanted to do the absolute minimum number of splits.
Well, John, thank you so much. And everybody, remember that we will be taking your questions and we'll have another session next Wednesday. And with that, Chris, do you want to introduce Paul?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we're going to go to our 2nd place contestant here. Paul Nieve is from Yonkers, New York. And interestingly, Paul was also one of our 3 finalists in the Ohio House and Senate Fair Districts Ohio Mapping Competition. And I would also just throw in that the advisory committee that made the ultimate determinants of who these top 3 winners are did not know the names of the contestants. They didn't know. So what I had done is just gave them each contestant a letter. So they were voting on map O or map A or map H, for example. So I didn't know if they were from Ohio or if they're male or female, what their names were, anything about this. So it was a nice blind experiment for that. And so here's Paul and his map. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, great. I'm Paul. I'm from Yonkers, as Chris said. Thank you for this opportunity for having me on this webinar to discuss my work and engage with others and to improve upon it. So my goal in drawing up Ohio's congressional districts was to create a proportional map with minimal partisan bias to the extent Ohio law and the state's political geography would allow. So you'll notice that this plan has a negligible partisan bias, meaning that it doesn't favor any party, according to the analytical measurements utilized in Dave's redistricting app. So incumbency wasn't considered. Population deviation is within the legally acceptable range. So my mapping plan encompasses a balance of compact, fair districts that ensures competitiveness and protection of communities of interest, including minority groups, with minimal county splitting. So I'm going to break the analysis part into 3 parts. So the first part will be the partisanship. So according to the Dave's redistricting app analytics, a perfectly proportional map would have 7 districts leaning Democratic, as Chris mentioned earlier. If you can see the proportional seats and the geographic seats here. But the state's political geography benefits Republicans, which yields them an extra district. So between 6 and 7 seats is what I was shooting for, which is what my map has. If you look at the other bias measures, the turnout bias, the partisan bias, both being at 0 and some other measures being at 0, this indicates that the map doesn't favor one party over the other and helps contend with the geography bias, which hurts Democrats. Going back to the map, there are multiple competitive districts across the state that are likely to remain competitive throughout the decade. Districts 4, 9, and 13 have similar partisan leanings. Their composite scores average to 3.3% in Democrats' favor. Districts 10, 12, and 14 have slightly stronger leanings, but nothing more than 7.4%. And I accomplished all of this by combining large and small cities in their respective regions. So Toledo and other small cities throughout the Lake Plains in the 9th district, Dayton and Springfield in the 10th, Youngstown, Warren kept together in the 14th, trying to keep these districts as competitive as possible as other rural parts trend more heavily Republican. On the other side of the spectrum, Morrow County helps keep the 12th district competitive as the rest of the district, Delaware County and Northern Franklin County, trend heavily towards Democrats, and this also prevents another county from being divided. Another point I want to make is the 10th district is a bellwether district, so it matches the statewide partisanship. The second part having to do with compactness, communities of interest, minority representation. So these districts are visibly compact and certainly contrasting with the current map. Most of the oddly district shaped lines are due to municipal boundaries. Only 12 counties, as you've already seen, are split, and no county is split more than once. Columbus, of course, being very populated and more so than an ideal population of a district, is the only major city that I split. The 11th still is actually the same as John's. Can still elect a Black congressperson with a plurality Black voting age population. The third is now plurality white, and although it retains a mostly white voting age population, it elected a Black representative in 2012 and has since, with a larger white voting bloc. And Cincinnati's Black communities are kept within the 1st district, which slightly increases their Black voting bloc. These districts also follow regional boundaries to the extent practicable, with the most consistent boundaries I use being the census designated metro areas. But I did use other criteria, including the Fair District Ohio Community Maps page, state geographic regions, media markets, connectedness, and other areas with shared socioeconomic, ethnic, and geographic interests. So I'm going to go finally the third part, breaking down why I split certain areas. I'm going to go into different regions and start in Cincinnati. So zoom in. So, Hamilton County is split into, since it's too large for a single district, but unlike the map presently in use, Cincinnati is kept whole and no other cities are divided. And the mostly Black communities to the north of Cincinnati are also kept in one district, creating a Democratic leaning district. The remainder is put into a suburban and exurban district, the 8th, still within the Cincinnati metro area, including Butler and Warren counties, as well as part of Claremont. There's a split in Claremont County and Union Township. It does follow the Williamsville boundary, at least according to this app, if you can see when that comes up. So I did follow that there, but again, I was trying to get to the population target. Zooming out towards the Dayton area, the 10th district. It's actually very similar to the current 10th district. Taking, well, if we can load, Montgomery and Greene counties, but instead of heading to Fayette, I go up to Clark and take in Springfield. This makes the district a bit more competitive and more compact. I want to jump over to Columbus now. Franklin County is now split between just 2 districts, 3 and 12. District 3 more neatly respects municipal boundaries and is now plurality white. It does keep together the largely Black neighborhoods of Columbus. The remainder of Franklin County goes into District 12, which also includes Delaware and Morrow, which makes it an urban, suburban, Democratic trending district entirely in the Columbus metro area. So Westerville is also kept whole. I saw that Gahanna was mentioned before, and that's kept whole here. district doesn't go up to Mansfield or Zanesville anymore. So finally jumping over to, well, not finally, but the Cleveland area. If that'll load. So District 11, again, is plurality Black in Cuyahoga County that splits no municipalities and keeps together mostly Black cities outside of Cleveland. The rest of Cuyahoga goes into the 4th district, which also takes most of Lorain County. So this area isn't cracked anymore, which allows for a new competitive district. I want to zoom out and take a look at Northeast Ohio, the rest of it. District 13 and 14, which are rather competitive districts. The 13 mostly in the Akron metro area. So it takes Portage, Summit. It does go up into Geauga. And I'll explain in a minute. The 14th, taking in all Ashtabula, Lake, Mahoning, Trumbull, and then coming down into Columbiana, taking Salem. So I saw on the community maps page that Stark County, frequently they wanted it kept together. That's why I went there instead of coming into Canton, which is what would have made a more, maybe a fairer district or fair map overall. But I wasn't going to go into Medina or into Cuyahoga, so I went up into Geauga, which pushes the 14th down into Salem, which is why those counties are split that way. So we'll take a look at the remaining large districts, like the 2nd, Southern Ohio district. Only Hocking is split here, and of course Claremont from earlier. The 5th, a large rural Western district that keeps its cities, small cities together. The Logan County split is done to make both the 5th and 7th a bit more compact than they would otherwise be. Bellefonte does cross multiple townships, and so it's like it's hard to keep communities that cross multiple boundaries like that together, especially if you're trying to reach a population target. 6th district, a primarily Appalachian district, but also having to go west. The 6th and 15th are drawn this way. I was trying to get the most compact districts, at least according to the apps analytics. A more Appalachian district that doesn't come around here, on like you saw on John's map, may be more ideal, but with my goal, it turned out this way. And the 7th district is a north central Ohio district. It takes in a lot of its small cities, so Mansfield, Ashland, Marion. And the 9th district, again, a Lake Plains district. Most of the people live in the Toledo metro area. So overall, my plan is proportional, compact, and respects communities of interest, and creates new competitive districts throughout the state. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul, for walking us through that. One of the questions, my first question really had to do with what is the Princeton Gerrymandering Project and how did you get involved in this? I think a lot of people are wondering how it is a guy from Yonkers on this webinar.
Yeah, well, it's an anti-gerrymandering group through Princeton University that works to try to do some of the work that we're doing here, try to bring awareness to gerrymandering and try to bring about a more fair, proportionate congressional and also state legislative map plans throughout the country. They had a contest earlier in this year, and I competed in that and was invited to join the Mapping Corps, which is doing work now, grading new maps that are coming out and comparing them to what fairer maps would be. And someone in there, pointed out that this contest was going on, and so a few people from that group also were entered the contest. But
The next question is, listening to John's explanation of his map, were there things you thought, oh, maybe I want to change something?
First of all, maps are, especially in the Northeast, are pretty similar, but I am open to changing 6 and 15, especially to get a more Appalachian-centric district. That was the biggest thing that I picked up when would want to change.
Yeah, I do think people have kind of questions about kind of what happened with Stark County and that kind of thing.
Again, I'm trying to reach the population target and stay within the range, not split so many counties. And so, most of Portage and Summit counties make up most of a district, and would have to go somewhere that would make the most sense for it. But also, I can't split Stark, or I could, but people wouldn't like that either.
Well, I don't know if you noticed the comments in the chat. There are lots of people who like your map, and we're just really glad that you joined us today. And now, Chris, if you're willing to introduce Riley, who is number 3 in winning maps. And thank you, Paul.
Oh, yes.
Yes, thank you, Paul. And I think
thanks.
Tiffany had put in the chat a link to Paul's narrative. And as we're going to be sharing, switching screens here, all 3 of our winners wrote very rich, detailed narratives. And so if you want to learn more about their thought processes, you might want to just click on the link and you can see and read several pages worth of information about how they came up with their districts. So very rich, and that was a requirement as part of the competition. So again, another factor, sort of a soft factor that the advisory committee analyzed. And so now we're looking at Riley Jones's map, and Riley is an Ohio native and now living in California in graduate school. And we're very, very pleased to turn the session over to him to explain his map. Thanks, Riley.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Riley. I'm very happy to be here. And to provide an even briefer background on me is I've lived almost my entire life in Ohio. I grew up in Loveland, which is a suburb of Cincinnati. I went to high school at Moeller High School, which is in another suburb of Cincinnati. And I went to Ohio State for college, which I think provides me a pretty unique experience for a mapping competition like this, because one of the advantages of going to a state school like Ohio State is you get to meet people from all corners of the state. So in a lot of these communities that we're discussing in this mapping competition, chances are I actually probably know someone who lives in that community and has probably offhandedly commented on the nature of where they live, and perhaps they associate more with the Akron-Canton area rather than the Cleveland area, or they live by Youngstown and don't really associate with Cleveland very much. So I think that provides me a pretty unique perspective on how some of these communities of interest interact with each other and should be grouped together. And kind of going off what Paul and John have said earlier is that of course I had the same objectives with my map, creating very fair, minimizing county splits, hitting the population targets, grouping together ethnic communities. And in particular, I'd say with my map that I really focused on was creating competitive districts, in addition to making sure that it had a fair partisan split. Because in my opinion, having partisan splits is great, but it creates very boring election cycles, to put it frankly. I think it's important that you have a good number of competitive districts so that when election season comes around, it forces candidates in that district to actually engage with their voters and pursue an active campaign that really engages with the communities and figures out what the issues are. Because from my experience, when you live in a district that is solidly red or solidly blue, when it comes election season, the candidate 1 week before the election stakes out a few signs in front of the highway, and then they win the election. You never see them, you never hear from them. That's about it. And so I think it's important to have a good mix of competitive and, as Chris mentioned, hyper-competitive districts, so that people actually are motivated to go to the polls because they feel like they could have an actual impact on the outcome of the election. And so with that, I'm going to do a brief flyover of some of my districts. And I'm going to start in the southwest corner, which is perhaps what I'm most familiar with because this is the area I'm from. And another thing I want to mention is some of the striking similarities between all 3 maps. And across all 3 maps, one thing you find is that we have this portion of Hamilton County allotted into one district, which I think just goes to show that some of these districts could be considered no-brainers, really, that there's really no other way to split Hamilton County in a way that makes sense other than giving the city of Cincinnati and some of its suburban areas its own district. So the second district here contains the entire city of Cincinnati and all of its most important suburbs also within Hamilton County. Blue Ash, Madeira, Norwood are all contained within this. And since Hamilton County in itself can't be an entire district, it's too populous, a part of it does have to be lopped off and given to another district. And in my map, the western end is taken off, particularly because, I mean, I've been to a lot of these places in Hamilton County, and the western end does have kind of a feel more similar to my 3rd district. It's very blue collar, working class, a little more less dense, not very city-like, or densely suburban, like you might find in some of these other communities in the 2nd district. And so that's taken off and given to this 3rd district, which is the district I would live in. And it includes Warren County and a little bit of Claremont County and the county here that contains Middletown and Hamilton. And I think this district is great because it includes all these areas around Cincinnati that would be considered part of the greater Cincinnati metro area. And they all share, I mean, this is the area I'm from, so I'm very familiar with most of these places. And they all, if you ask anyone who lived here, they'd probably say that they, at least loosely associate with being in the Cincinnati area. And particularly some of these cities along the Great Miami River, such as Hamilton and Middletown, all have a very Rust Belt blue collar feel to them. And even though that might be a little bit different from Mason or Loveland or Milford, they all can fly under the banner of being part of the area outside of Cincinnati. And it even goes down to this Claremont County bit here, because all these communities that hug the Hamilton County border but are in Claremont County most certainly associate with communities out here. I live in I'm squeezed in the corner of Claremont County here, and the current situation is me being in Ohio's 2nd district, which puts me with all these rural counties. And that's I don't really associate myself too much with counties that are like Chillicothe. I more associate with Mason and these communities here. Going on to Columbus, like the other 2 maps, I do have a north-south split. And also similarly, this 4th district includes Columbus's African-American community. And one thing I was very particular on with all my districts was following the municipal lines as well. And so if we go put a city line overview, you can see that it pretty neatly follows some of the municipal lines within Franklin County. Unfortunately, Columbus's municipal boundaries resemble Swiss cheese, so it's a little hard to follow it to a T, but it does a pretty good job on its part. And so 4 would be southern Franklin County and a majority of the Columbus area, and also extends over here to group in Pickerington, which is a small community in this neighboring county, but is closely associated with being in the Columbus metro area. And the 5th district is just the remainder of Columbus's suburbs: Worthington, Dublin, Hilliard, Westerville, Upper Arlington, as well as Delaware County up here, which does get into some rural regions, but it does include some important Columbus suburbs such as Powell, and even Delaware to some extent, some may say, is a very extreme suburb of Columbus. And so with the time remaining, I would like to try and untangle my Northeast Ohio, which I think the other 2 winners would agree is kind of the part that picks your brain the most. It's a very interesting part of Ohio. And in order to slice it up into districts, you do have to be very careful with the way you do it, just because it's such a populous area. And I think the issue is you're not going to make everyone happy, regardless of the way you slice it. You have these major cities like Akron, Canton, Youngstown, Cleveland, and then the surrounding suburbs. And they're all so tied together that any way you slice it, someone's probably going to think that wasn't the optimal way. So I really tried my best, based on my knowledge of the area, to slice it in a way I think would be a good compromise. And so I particularly like the 12th county because you always hear of the Akron-Canton area. Rarely do you say, people say I'm from the Akron-Canton area. And they're 2 cities that are very closely tied together over decades. They have very similar roots in industry, and I think it was important that those were kept together. So the 12th district does cut Summit County and Stark County, but includes those 2 municipalities in the surrounding area. The 11th district includes some of these lakefront counties east of Cleveland, such as Ashtabula, and it also reaches into the western end of, the eastern end of Cuyahoga County to include some suburbs of Cleveland, such as Shaker Heights. And then it dips down and includes Solon and Twinsburg and the college town of Kent, which I believe would all, recognize themselves as, either ex-urban areas or suburban areas of Cleveland. And perhaps who would be the most feel they got left out of this compromise is Youngstown, because it got grouped together with some of these rural counties, Appalachian counties down here, notably New Philadelphia. But if actually this 10th district, if we go to the statistics, it does have a Republican lean of 55 to 42. However, that could still be considered a semi-competitive district, being that if I switch the election data to the 2018 election when Sherrod Brown is reelected as senator, this district actually becomes hyper-competitive. And so I think it really depends on the race you're looking at and who the candidates might be, that this district is not solid red. It does have the potential to swing either way. And that's all I have for my overview.
So Riley, would you be willing to walk us through the Dayton area, Montgomery County?
Yeah, of course. So I think it was important that Dayton and its suburbs and this nearby college town of Springfield were kept together. And so perhaps one of my biggest regrets on this map is this area. I think it could be improved considering I kind of just slice out this part of the county with Troy in it. I think a better option might have been to include Montgomery County, the county with Xenia, and then kind of rope in Springfield with that. But I think the idea is still the same, that Dayton, some of its suburbs between Springfield and Dayton, such as Fairborn and Beaver Creek, and then the city of Springfield itself, are all kept together. So this district would lean Republican under normal circumstances, but I think in a lot of cases, it could be very competitive as well.
All right. Well, we had a number of questions about that basically have to do with the splitting. So Gary Gale, who spent a lot of time kind of thinking about mapping, he lives in Stark County area. He was really interested in the notion of all three of the winners kind of split up some of the smaller counties. And he, and I'm just wondering kind of about that choice, and particularly since it may be that that the map makers would go, meaning the official map makers might go a different direction. So could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so splitting some of the smaller counties perhaps refers to the way that like the 8th district kind of dips here and the 6th district kind of dips into this county. All of that is just a result of trying to equalize the population between districts. Perhaps if I spent more hours on this map, I could fine tune it in a way that some of these predominantly rural districts, such as the 9th, 8th, 6th, really encompass just whole counties. But in the end, when I was just fine tuning it, I would see like, oh, this district needs like 4,000 more people. Like it's made of whole districts, but it just needs 4,000 more people. So you just rope in a few precincts from a neighboring rural county. Sure, it does technically split a county, but I'm sure that in that area, it's all rural farmland at that point. So when you rope in a nearby county, if you were to walk across those county lines, you probably wouldn't notice when you live there. But yeah, I'm sure that there is a way to compromise and create some of these districts made of solely of whole counties. But the reason that you see in my map, some of these smaller counties are split is solely just to get that last 5,000, 4,000 people in that district that it needs.
Yeah, and I was going to say, the president of the League of Women Voters of Ohio is on. Her name is Iris Meltzer, and she is from Kent in Portage County.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of similar to like what I asked you before, but she was just interested in, it's large geographically, but relatively small in population, and she just wondered about that split.
Here in Kent. So
you can see Kent there, yes.
yeah. So admittedly, this Northeast area of Ohio is what I'm least familiar with. So I'm open to any input on it as to how it might better be split. But I know that if we go to a partisan breakdown, you can see that riding along the edge of the Cleveland municipal lines here in Northern Summit County and here in Western Portage County, they're all either blue or riding the edge of Republican and Democrat. And so I think it was appropriate for this 11th district to come down and come made up of 3 whole counties, but then 3 split counties, because I believe that it ropes in some very similar communities that are pretty split politically. And I think that, people in this Portage County might associate more with being part of Summit County. But I think that since I put Summit County with Canton, that excludes that possibility of them being together. If you put Portage County with Summit County, it can't be with Canton. And I thought it was important that Akron and Canton are together. And so to compromise, I put Kent with this 11th district so that it didn't get put in with the Youngstown area.
Well, I have to say thank you so much, Riley. So I'm going to throw this to the map makers. This is the question that I would like you to think about what question you would ask one another, or what kind of suggestion you would make to one another. And I'll give you a chance to think about that for a minute. Riley, do you have any questions, or Paul or John? Well, we can always come back to that later. I just figured as somebody who, so I started with a little bit of map making in 2009 and quickly discovered that I seriously was not up for this, because it takes a level of detail. It takes a level of detail I was not up for. I just wanted to really say thank you so much for the folks that spent some time explaining their maps, thinking about their maps. I noticed that Tiffany and Mia were popping into the chat the form for feedback, because the next time we get together, which will be noon on Wednesday the 20th, this is an opportunity for us to look at, well, okay, what if we actually, did change the map around? What are the choices? How would it impact the map? How would it affect competitiveness? How would it affect keeping communities together? And I'm actually really looking forward to that conversation, because I know all of us have looked at our areas and we're like, well, what about this? And this is, and yet, the map makers have to make some really good choices. The other thing is, if in the form that's about giving suggestions, if you have created a map that you want to share with the map makers, please let us know. And we just, really appreciate your time, and especially the time of our winners. A big congratulations to John Hagner, a big congratulations to Paul Nieve, a big congratulations to Riley Jones. We just so appreciate your being with us today, walking us through the maps. And we look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday at noon. And with that, Chris, anything you want to add?
No, just echo thanks to our winners, and thanks for everyone for your really rich comments. Nice to see. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week.